أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا أولئك لهم عذاب مهين صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين. I give evidence that there is no God other than Allah, and I give evidence that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is the last, the final messenger of Allah, after whom no prophet, old or new, will come. And I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. The verse of the Quran that I have recited, I interpret as follows. Among human beings, there is someone who sells the diversion or the amusement of Hadith to turn away from the path of Allah, not being aware, and he or she takes it as a joke. These, for them, is a disgraceful agony. This verse is taken from chapter 31 of the Quran, which is perhaps known to many people as a chapter entitled Luqman. Much is not spoken about Luqman. We know he's a prophet. It is mentioned that he is a prophet. But because other prophets of God, such as Moses, Jesus, Abraham, and so on, are so often referred to, we sometimes neglect Luqman. The name of this particular prophet and the identity of him has been discussed by so many people. Maulana Muhammad Ali has correctly identified him as an individual who has gone by the name of Aesop. And that name Aesop came from Ethiopia, Aesop. He was an Ethiopian. It is said he was taken in slavery and taken to Greece, and so his name was translated from what it was originally, and he was called Aesop because he was from Ethiopia. But the Quran gives him the word name Luqman, and that name is very suitable to the nature of the personality, because the word lukum is actually an Arabic word that means a morsel of food, a little bit of food that you put in your fingers or so, and you place it in your mouth to eat. Now, you may use some kind of object, whether it is a spoon, your fingers or so, make it into a ball, what is called a bolus or mouthful or bite size, and then you place it in your mouth. And indeed, we find that that kind of metaphor is exactly what is meant by the word Ethiopia, which is also called Abyssinia. And Abyssinia, Ethiopia being the Greek word, Abyssinia being the Amharic word or so, but the Arabic word for it is Habash. And people from that area are called Habshi. And the word Habash in Arabic means to collect sustenance using your wit, using your intelligence. And we find that Aesop or Luqman was an individual who would put moral qualities, which human traits that possess moral qualities, but in the form of stories, animals, and we know Aesop fables. So animals, he put human traits in them to convey moral lessons. In other words, he's using his wit and his intelligence, using small stories to try to get across his message. It was a different way of propagating the religion of Islam. As we know, all prophets propagated the religion of Islam. But what is special about Luqman, as mentioned in this chapter, so many things about him. People tend to think he's a bit unknown. In fact, you look up the word Aesop and nobody knows where the name came from and who he was really. And there have been many different viewpoints. Somehow, because of his popularity, some people don't want to acknowledge him as an African and think he was Greek, but they know that he was a stranger in a particular island, and he got out of slavery by means of using of his wit and his intelligence. So he was in fact a very intelligent individual. But this chapter also identifies Luqman with a relationship of his son. In the second section, it tells us that Luqman said certain things to his son. Now, often we associate prophethood with adults. We know the Prophet Muhammad himself became a prophet after he was 40 years of age, and 40 has been identified in the Quran as a stage in which we now move on to adulthood. So perhaps below 40 people are still youths. They are still young ones. And there have been in the Quran prophets of younger than 40 years of age who have been identified. The Quran speaks of John having wisdom and knowledge even while he was a young person. The Quran speaks about Jesus, who became a prophet, we are told, around the age of 30, and he lived for 120 years and had that long period of prophethood from Palestine going into Afghanistan and Kashmir, where he died and is buried. And we also have the Prophet Joseph, who was identified with, being able to make prophecies even at a young age, and was a person who was confined to a prison very unjustly. So we find the Quran speaking about prophethood in different categories of people. And some people even believe that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a prophet of God, and has been, verses of the Quran have been mentioned in order to substantiate that. And there's no reason why women could not have also been prophets. This was not special to men. So this particular chapter deals with a message to young people when it comes to the propagation of Islam. Now, we live in an age in which there are so many variations of Islam that young people become very enthusiastic about wanting to promote this religion, but they are in some cases fed up with the status quo. What is presented to them as religion. This is Shia, this is Sunni, this is Wahhabi, this is Qadiani, this is and different things, whether we should wear hijab, whether we should sight the moon, and there are so many confusing issues that the real purpose of religion is no longer not easily to be seen. So this chapter particularly gives a message to the young people who are enthusiastic about propagation of Islam. But the Quran points out here, and that's why it has selected this chapter as Luqman, that in the propagation of Islam there are two things which are necessary, two things which are needed, two things which are essential. One is content. What are you going to propagate? And the second is method. How are you going to propagate it? And these two are dealt with beautifully in this chapter of the Quran. Because just as when you want to feed somebody physically, you have to have the proper content, the proper food with the proper nutrients, but you also want to do a presentation. You also want to make it appealing. Very often children don't want to eat food. You have to do certain things to make it appealing for them so that they can develop a liking for it and be nourished by it. So the Quran points out to us here that just as you have physical feeding, you gather food, you'll put, yes, a lot of food, but you take it bit by bit, morsel by morsel, bite size, and use your fingers or spoon or whatever it is. So either feed yourself or feed somebody else. But the content of the spiritual food that is needed in preparation, in giving, the Quran says here, in the very first verse of this chapter that says, Alif, Lam, Mim. And as I've already explained on several occasions, these three letters stand for the entire purpose of life that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, has identified. Alif stands for Amara, Lam stands for Lawama, and Mim stands for Mutma'inna. In other words, the whole purpose of life is to move ourselves from Amara to Lawama to Mutma'inna. And Amara means the soul in its initial raw state that has no guidance. It can be right or wrong. Choices have to be made. But as we go along in life, we begin to learn, we begin to understand, we begin to make more educated choices because we have knowledge now. Lam stands for knowledge. And then we reach a stage where we become perfected in that knowledge. It happens in every aspect of life. Not only in religion. In sport, you will find a person unable to bat or unable to kick a football. Many children cannot even do that or throw a ball. But then they learn. And then eventually they become perfected at it, that they make high scores in the goal or in the, making runs, as the case may be. They develop a technique that becomes part and parcel of them. That is what Mutma'inna means. And it happens in every aspect of life, but more so morally and spiritually. We start off by being people who can't make proper decisions, but then we educate ourselves and then we become perfected in. So the Quran points out to us that the content in the propagation of Islam must be the development of the soul, the development of the personality. And it says, how do you do that? These are the verses of the book that teaches us restraint. And it is a guidance and it is a mercy for the doers of good, who keep up prayer and pay the poor rate and who are certain of the hereafter. And they are on a guidance from their Lord, and they are the who are successful. I'm using here Maulana Muhammad's translation rather than my own interpretation, which may be a bit more definitive. But then the next verse in chapter 6 says, in verse 6 of this chapter says, and if I were to read the Maulana Muhammad's translation, of men is he who takes instead frivolous discourse here being hadith, to lead people astray from Allah's path without knowledge and to make it a mockery, for such is an abasing chastisement. My interpretation is that they are human beings who sell the diversion or the amusement of hadith to turn away from the path of Allah. In other words, they look at hadith and they make a mockery out of it. And what is hadith? But there's a new approach that many people are taking in the world today, which is that they call themselves Quranists. That is, they stick only to the Quran and they don't want to use hadith whatsoever. They say it is a fabrication, they say it came much later on. But in doing so, they dump the whole concept of hadith in a way which sometimes they even make ridicule it, as I will show you in just a while. The Quran is very clear. It is the best hadith. That does not mean that there are not other hadiths. It is the best. The best cannot be singular. Best means it has to be compared with others. And the Quran does mention other hadiths and does mention that there are hadiths that gives us lesson. It speaks of the hadith of Musa. Hal ataka hadith of Musa. Have you not heard about the hadith of Moses? It speaks of the hadith of Abraham. It speaks of the hadith of others as well. There are several verses of the Quran speaking about other hadiths. And it says in the hadith of Moses there is a lesson. So that the Quran itself speaks of other hadiths. And sometimes it says if you're talking to people and you find they're speaking nonsense about Allah's messages, don't speak to them. Stop this conversation until they bring another hadith. Let them speak on some other discourse or topic or something like that. So another hadith could mean other than the Quran because they are ridiculed in the Quran. So that we find that it is important for us to note what is the content that we are talking about. And the Quran in the next section, this chapter, speaks about Luqman's advice to his son. And he says, we give Luqman wisdom. Give thanks to Allah, and whoever is thankful for his own soul. In other words, the Quran says the content in the propagation of Islam that young people must focus on is the attributes of Allah. The attributes of Allah. The word Allah is not just a name. It means a name that has a meaning. And that meaning is that existence that contains all attributes of perfection. So whenever we speak of the word Allah, we are speaking about numerous attributes. Some people identify them as 99. But we are speaking about all the attributes of Allah, or whatever attributes there are. The Quran says, call him by Rahman, call him by Rahim, or whatever name you call him, whatever attribute, he has all the beautiful attributes. Lahul Asma'ul Husna. So all these attributes of and Luqman is telling his son, therefore, the content must be the attributes of Allah and not shirk. Shirk is the opposite of the attributes of Allah. So instead of love, hate. Instead of forgiveness, revenge, and so on. Instead of charity, miserliness. And all the attributes of Allah, you have opposites. And people have choices in life when they have to decide whether to be one or the other. So the Quran gives us the content. And then it tells us the method. What is the method? It says, of course, keep up prayer and do good and be patient. In verse 17 it says, O my son, keep up prayer, enjoin good and forbid evil, and bear patiently whatever befalls you. But the Quran also goes on to indicate that there should be respect for parents. Because it is from parents we also get their hadith, their attributes. Just as we get the attributes from Allah, we get certain attributes from our parents and our environment. But one of the most important messages here, and very famous and very well known, is that it says, do not turn your cheek with disrespect to people. Don't move about in the world while showing off. Allah has no love for persons who are showing off and boasting. And let there be purpose as you go along and lessen your tone. Indeed, the worst sound is the braying of donkeys. There's a very famous verse that we know of the Quran. That it says, Inna ankara al-aswata la sawtul hamid. Translated by one another, the most hateful of voices is the braying of asses. Now, what relevance is all of that? There are young people who sometimes become what is called echo chambers. Whenever they hear people say something, they echo it. They repeat it without understanding, without knowing the context, without knowing whether they're right or wrong. They just repeat it. And sometimes in the propagation of Islam, you find that a person may have right purpose, but they are going about it in the wrong way. And a good example of that is the time of the Prophet's birth, when Abraha came from Yemen to destroy the Kaaba, because it was a house of God that was filled with idolatry. And he represented, at that time, Christianity it's not the same Christianity as we have nowadays, with so many sects and so on. But there was a little purer form where there was still some kind of monotheism, but also some kind of recognition of Jesus as greater than a prophet of God. And he came with elephants to destroy the Kaaba, and Allah destroyed him instead. Knowing that that's not the way to propagate Islam, with violence. And so Allah waited 40 years after that, when the Prophet Muhammad was made a prophet, and took 23 years more to change people by the messages of the Quran, by the ayats of the Quran. So what the Quran is saying here, these Quranists are a very valid point. Let's stick to the Quran, let's study the Quran. But instead of trying to explain the Quran, what they do is they condemn people who follow Hadith. And they tend to turn them away from the path of Allah, even changing the religion in so many ways. And there's one particular individual that I think it must be identified here, because there are many of them, but one particularly that has been brought to my attention. It's an individual who goes under the name of Baba Shoaib. And he, it is said, has translated, or he claims he has translated the Quran. It's a good translation. And he has also written another book referred to the Quran, which is just about 60 pages. When you look at these books, you find that they are just, yes, translations of the Quran and selection of verses. I have not come across commentaries of him in writing, but he has numerous videos on YouTube explaining his viewpoints. But one of the things that you will note is that he has a tendency to call people hypocrites and mushriks, anybody who differ with him. He calls them, and he makes fun of them, as the Quran is saying here, the diversion of Hadith. He's using, instead of promoting the concepts of the Quran as he believes it, he condemns those who say Hadith. In other words, he uses the amusement. He takes Hadith, makes a joke out of it. As the Quran is saying here, he or she takes it as a joke. And this particular individual, his actual name is Sheikh Abdullahi, originally from Ghana. He migrated to Finland, and I suppose now he's finished. And he says he has studied modern standard Arabic grammar and comprehension in the elementary schools. Then he became self-studied. And then online he did his studies in classical Arabic. And he authored these two books, referred to the Quran and the Great Quran. The fact that a person learns Arabic, classical Arabic, and even translate the Quran doesn't make that person a great scholar. I myself have done my Bachelor of Arts in Arabic, Islamic Studies, majoring in Arabic. I have also co-authored the Dictionary and Concordance of the Quran. That took 20 years of my time. And it's a big book, huge book, as people know. I don't claim to be an Arabic scholar. I can't speak Arabic, but I can understand it. I can understand the Quran. I can translate it. But I don't claim to be an Arabic scholar. So the fact that a person can do that doesn't necessarily make that individual a very highly educated scholar also. A simple human being can, in fact, a literate person, the Prophet Muhammad was a literate person. And he knew Arabic, and he had to interpret the Quran himself as well. So that we find that this particular individual, when he translates the Quran, for example, he uses the word salah, and he translates it as litany. I looked at one particular video trying to figure out what he meant by salah, and in almost an hour or so, I couldn't figure out what he was saying. Only making fun of people, calling people hypocrites, showing videos of other people and said, these are the people who are praying, this is how they pray. Then he did mention that in prayer there is standing, and he sort of, but I couldn't figure out afterwards what he meant by praying. For example, I saw another video where he said that there's nothing, no, the word rakat doesn't appear in the Quran. But the word sajda also doesn't appear, but he agrees with sajda, and he knows that the word ruku is there in the Quran, raki'in, warka'u raki'in, the Quran speaks about it. But he says, Muslims say that you have 5 times prayer and it was revealed on the night of the Miraj. So he goes on to describe in the Hadith. And this is where the Quran says he makes everything as a joke, particularly Hadith. So he says the Prophet Muhammad goes to God, who gave him 50 prayers, and then he comes back. He sees Moses. Moses is dead, and he's talking to this dead prophet. And then Moses said, no, people don't do that, so he went back. So he keep going back and forth. He said, in the meanwhile, Gabriel is on his phone. Where's Gabriel? Gabriel took him to heaven, but Gabriel is on his phone. And then when he came back the last time and said, well, 5 prayers, I'm not going back, then Gabriel came off the phone and decided to bring him back. Now, that shows the kind of individual you're dealing with, who is promoting the ideas of the Quran, but making fun of Hadith, and in fact making it as a joke. And I didn't have time to listen to all the numerous videos, but because they're so boring, and many of them are laughable. Sometimes he himself laughs. He seems to be more of a comedian than a commentator of the Quran. In one case, an individual says, A'udhu Billahi. He said, listen to what he says. Where is that in the Quran? But the Quran says, and he himself has translated it, A'udhu Billah. فَاسْتَعِيذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. He says that is not in the Quran to seek your refuge in Allah from the accursed devil. But the Quran says when you read the Quran, seek escape in Allah, in the attributes of Allah, from the shaitan al-rajim, from the rejected outside influences that are there. This is why it is so important for us to understand that there is need for a Mujaddid. And a Mujaddid is not merely one who just comes out and takes out of his hat and interpret the Quran and tell you to believe this. He is appointed by Allah. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad came and wrote a book saying, I will defend Islam against all other concepts. He called it Barahini Ahmadiyya, the evidence of the Prophet Muhammad. He said, I'm going to show you how this religion is the most excellent religion. He wasn't a Mujaddid at that time. He didn't receive any revelation at that time. And he said, I'm going to write 50 books to prove the truth of this religion. And Barahini Ahmadiyya was supposed to be in 50 books. But then it was reduced only to 5. So some people laugh at him and said, you see, Prophet 50 books and only 5. But we see that even in the Miraj of the Prophet Muhammad, where the Prophet Muhammad was given 50 prayers, and eventually when it came down to 5, it says, okay, the 5 is equal to 50. In other words, if you can focus on these 5 prayers, it's as if you have done 50. So the knowledge that are in those 5 books of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is as if he had written 50 books on his own, because that knowledge came after he had received revelation from Allah. So we need really people appointed by God. Then God appointed Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as a Mujaddid, and he says, Allah has told me I'm the Mujaddid of the age. And he is not a self-styled authority, as Baba Shoaib says, and many others. There are young people in different parts of the world who are confused because they look on the internet, and perhaps some of our young people here, they don't come to our monthly readings, if they don't make Jummah, if they don't attend some of our functions, where else they are getting the knowledge of Islam? Either from other imams, other mosques, other young people. And they are, if they don't look in themselves on the internet, they are being influenced by concepts and ideas in the internet which may be not entirely correct. Some of it may be correct, but not entirely correct. And so the Quran points out to us and tells us that those who argue about the verses of Allah without authorization, those who argue about the book without authorization, coming to them, in their chest there's nothing other than bigging up themselves. And this particular individual, Baba Shoaib, he says, I'm a correction officer. He doesn't call himself Mujaddid. Correction officer, I'm going to correct you. I don't know if it meant that he was a prison officer and correcting people who are in jail, or he's freeing them, what he means by that. It's very confusing and sometimes very, childish to listen to some of his bragging about himself and how he defends his points of view and how he condemns others. The Quran says there is nothing other than bigging up themselves, which they will never achieve. So you seek escape in the attributes of Allah. We must seek our protection in developing the attributes of Allah, and not just listen to the ranting and ravings of people who, however good their intentions and however nice ideas they have and using the Quran, but they're using it wrongly. They're not using it to develop the human personality, they're using it to condemn the human personality. No doubt we know the Quran is a book of guidance and Hadith is a book of reference. But it does not mean you have to condemn it. It does not mean you have to call people who follow its teachings mushriks and hypocrites, as he has been doing in numerous of his videos. You get fed up sometimes just listening to him. And so we find, look at the role of the Mujaddid. The Quran says when you invite people to truth, use good words. Do it with a good mind. And وَتَوَصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. When you promote truth, be patient. Don't rush it. In his case, he always says, bring people right now. The lines are open. Let them call me and challenge them. Bigging up himself that I can answer anybody. I can give. Sometimes it's a waste of time just responding to such people. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad has defined the religion of Islam from one simple verse of the Quran. In chapter 2, verse 112, which says, Bala man aslama wajhahu lillahi wa huwa muhsin falahu ajru inna rabbihim wa la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. That man aslama, who is really a Muslim, who is really one who submits himself or herself to Allah, is one who does aslama wajha lillah. We turn our attention to Allah, and I said Allah means the attributes of Allah. Allah is the one word used, but representative of all his attributes. So we turn ourselves to the attributes of Allah. Wa huwa muhsin. That he does more than is necessary in order to develop these attributes. How can we develop the attributes of Allah? Just believing that God is love, that God is truth. We have to promote it in our lives. Wa huwa muhsin. Falahu ajruhu inda rabbihim. And these you will see there is a result. A result that is coming from their nurturer. Allah will nurture them. You will see them growing and developing. You will see them becoming more intelligent, more committed, more dedicated. It's successful in anything that they're doing. And any challenges they have in life, la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. They are not going to fear. They are not going to be afraid. They can lose their job. They can be opposed by people. They can be sent to jail as Joseph has been sent. And they can suffer disease, financial difficulties, whatever. La khawfun alayhim. There's no fear. They accept it as the will of God. Their relatives may pass away or become, they see other people are suffering and being killed in other countries in the world. Children are starving and so on. But they have no fear. They realize that they have their own self-development to see. Walahum yahzanun. And they will not regret whatever they do in their self-development. So the Quran gives an important message to young people in when you are promoting the Quran, when you are promoting Islam and propagating Islam, which is what Isha'ati Islam is, look for the sources that are in fact authorized by Allah, and not people who merely want to get more likes on Facebook or want to get more subscribers on YouTube or whatever platform they're using. TikTok, this particular individual said, I'm on about 5 or 6 platforms. I'm on Twitch, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, and I'm a host of others that he's on. So promoting his ideas and printing and publishing his books, and the 2 books he has done, which when you read it, it doesn't really, it's not much different. Much of the translation is taken from Maulana Mamdali or Maulana Pictola. There are 1 or 2 nice interpretations he has given to, which I will agree with, because I may translate it in the same way. I am not a scholar, but still, there are individuals. Arabic is a very simple language. That's why it's named Arabic. And I've always said that when the Quran says Quran and Arabian, it means the Quran which can easily be interpreted, can be easily translated into any language. So anybody who knows even simple Arabic and can understand the simple grammar of Arabic, you'll be able to interpret the Quran. You don't have to speak the language. You can use a dictionary. And he does that. He sometimes show you this particular word, and he goes on the internet and show you a dictionary where the word means this, that, and the other in English, because people don't know Arabic, and so he has to explain it. So it doesn't require any great scholar to really promote the concepts of Islam, and that's why we have Jummah service where anybody could pick up the Quran and could explain it if their heart and mind is pure. But if you're going to take the beautiful teachings of the Quran only to lash out at other people and to condemn them, and particularly to take a hadith, as the Quran says, and make a joke out of it in order to win people over to yourself, that is not the proper approach that our young people should be adopting. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم إنه تعالى جواد كريم ملك بر رؤوف رحيم. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa may yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa nashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i zil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'izukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Uzkurullaha yazkurkum wad'uhu yastajib lakum wa lazikrullahi ala akbar.